about 736 or 800 pixels, it should change its direction and move towards the left hand side. And when it reaches the left hand side, then again when it hits that 0 coordinate, x coordinate, then it should again change its direction and move towards the right hand side. So this is the movement in the x direction. Now there is also a movement in the y direction. So whenever it hits a boundary, whether it can be right boundary or the left boundary, then it should come a little bit down. So that imagine there are multiple enemies and we are trying to shoot all of those enemies down. So how will the game get over? So whenever these enemies hit the boundaries and come down, at one point of time they are going to hit the spaceship as they are coming down, and then we'll make it game over, like in the classic Space Invader. So we need to execute the X movement and as well as we need to execute the Y movement. Now this is going to be very easy because you already know how to move the spaceship, and we are going to do the same thing that we did in the player. So first of all, we'll just scroll up. Let's minimize this over here. So we are going to slow up, and because our enemy is going to have the exchange as well as the Y movement, so I'm just going to copy this over here and also make sure that we add a Y movement. Now enemy exchange over here, we are going to give it the value of 0.3. Maybe in future we'll speed it up because our spaceship is also at the speed of or exchange of 0.3. Maybe we'll change it up on future, but right now I'm just going to give it a value of 0.3. Now I'm not giving it a value. So for example, in player, we have just given it a value of 0 over here, and below over here we have changed its direction by typing in negative and positive. We are not going to do this with our enemy. We are just going to provide the value of 0.3 over here. Now if we scroll down, we are just going to do the same thing that we did with our player. So for example, over here we made sure that if it hit the boundary, so this is the algorithm basically. You can call it the algorithm, but it's pretty simple. So whenever it hits the 0 coordinate, we change its value to 0, and whenever it gets greater than 736, we make sure that its coordinates get to 736 again, and this prevents the spaceship from going out of bounds. So this is a kind of way of checking the boundary. So we can do the same thing with our enemy. So let me just copy and paste this over here, and instead of everywhere player, we are just going to call it enemy. So E should be in small. So over here also, let me just copy actually enemy and paste it everywhere. This is gonna make sure that we save up some time, not a lot of time, but so let's paste this enemy over here, I wish there was a quicker way to do it, but it's not. So anyways, now I'm just gonna add a comment over here so that you guys can understand what we are talking about over here. So checking for boundaries of spaceship so it doesn't go out of bounds. And over here we're just gonna write maybe enemy movement, and this looks pretty good. Now instead of restricting us, what we want is whenever a boundary is hit, we want it to go someplace. So for example, when it hits that left boundary, we want to increase the value of x so that it starts going in the right hand side direction, and similarly when it hits this right hand side boundary, then we want to decrease the value of x, and this will keep on happening because it's inside our while loop. So now we are going to use the same arithmetic operation that we used with our player. So if we scroll up a little bit, you can see when we wanted to change directions, we gave when we wanted to move towards the left, we gave it a value of minus, and when we wanted to move towards the right, we gave it a positive value of 0.3, and then we just added because of this arithmetic property. So we are going to do the same thing over here. So instead of enemy x equals to 0, what we are going to do is we are going to write enemy exchange equals to 0.3, and so that basically when it hits this left hand side, that is the 0 coordinate, it can start going towards a positive direction, that is it should start increasing the x value. And similarly, when we want it to go left hand side, we are going to change it to a minus value. So we are going to give it a value of minus, and this should be enough, guys. So, and actually if I scroll up, you can see that I have put the value of enemy x underscore change equals to 0.3. We can leave it to 0 or we can leave it to 0.3. It doesn't really matter. So let's run it and see if it works. Let me just close down the previous implementation so that we don't get confused. And I'm just gonna run it again, run main, and hopefully the enemy will start moving. So you can see that the enemy is moving from left hand side to right hand side, and actually this looks pretty awesome. So now you can see that it's not moving in the Y direction, it's just moving in the X direction. So what we want is that when it hits the right boundary, it should move downwards, or even if it hits the left boundary, it should move a little bit downwards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to add enemy Y change equals to 40 so that we can move it down by 40 pixels. So when do we want it to move down? We want it to move down when it hits the boundary, that is the 0 coordinate or the 736 coordinate. So we can just increase the value of Y over here and that should be enough. So I'm just going to write enemy Y plus equals to, and then we want the enemy Y change. Let's just paste over here, and then we can do the same thing over here. Let's not erase that, let's just add it over here. So now let's just reload it and see how it looks. So now you can see when it hits the boundary, it actually goes a little bit down. So you can imagine multiple enemies, when they are hitting the boundary, they are going down. So it's going to be a little bit difficult for a spaceship to eliminate all of them, but it's going to try its best. And when this enemy reaches this spaceship, we are going to give it a game over. And depending upon how many enemies we can hit with our bullet, which we'll be creating mostly in the next video or in the coming up videos, depending upon how many enemies he can eliminate with that bullet, the score is going to be according to that. So you can kind of get the idea of the game with this video as to how the game was going to look. So today we are going to be learning about adding background image to our pygame. So right now, if we open up our Space Invader game, you will be able to see that we have an enemy, we have a spaceship, but it's happening in the black background, which doesn't look that good. We need to add some kind of a space background to make it very cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm already downloaded an image of a background, that is background.png, and it somewhat looks like this. So how did I get this image? So what I did was I went to this website called freepik.com, P-I-K, and then freepik.com, and I searched for this text which says colorful spaceship background. Obviously feel free to get an image from wherever you want, but make sure you get an image that's 800 into 600 pixels. Why is that size? Because our game window is of that size. As you can see, we have made a game window of this area. So what I did was I went over there, and you can choose any of these images, but the image that I chose was this one, and then I used Illustrator. So Freepik is a website which is going to give you a lot of Illustrator, Photoshop stuff, and you have to edit it out to make it your own. So I removed all of the weird stuff that we didn't want. For example, this rocket, this text and stuff. So I removed all of that stuff. And if you know Illustrator, feel free to make a new image on your own. So what I'm going to do for you guys, if you're not able to get this image on your own, is that I'm going to attach it to the description or attach it somewhere so that you guys can get this image. Just look at this video's text. So what I'm going to do is, after we download this background image to our project folder, make sure you do that. Then we are just going to add it to our windows. So over here, how do we add images to our program? Is just by pygame.image.load. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to add a comment, let's say, and we are going to write just background. Let's just write background, and then I'm going to create a variable called background, and I'm going to do the same thing that we did with the rest. So I'm just going to copy and paste it over here, and instead of UFO, I'm going to write background. So obviously my image is of 800 into 600 pixels. So make sure it is of that size. So now that we have added it, if we run it right now, it's not going to appear because it just appears for a second and then it disappears. We want it to persist. So how do we make it persist? Is by adding it to our while loop. So we need to make sure that we go to our while loop over here, and we are going to add it just below the screen.fill, because if we don't, then this black color is going to be on top of our background image, which we don't want. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add another comment over here, which is going to say background image, and we forgot the B. So let's add B. And then over here, we are just going to do the screen. Just typical thing we do when we want to add an image, which is screen.blit. So basically draw the background image, and then we need the variable of the image. So that is background. And then we need to add the coordinates of our image. So we just want it to appear from the top left corner. So we are going to add 0, 0. And that should be pretty good. So let's run our main.py program. Let's run main. And you'll be able to see that our background is there. But the problem with the background and our enemy and a spaceship is now that they are moving very, very slowly. And why is this? So if you want to pause this video and figure it on your own, that would be pretty cool. But I'm just going to explain it over here. So our background.png is actually 226 pixels, 226 KB. So it's a little bit heavy. But what happens is when this while loop is running, every iteration of this while loop previously used to happen really, really fast. But now because it has to load this heavy background image, the iteration of this while loop, every iteration is a little bit more slow. So that is why whenever we are increasing the value over here, so for example, we are increasing the value of player, it is too small. So whenever this while loop is going, it's just increasing the value by 0.3, which is very slow. And that's why it's not able to move around a lot. So what we are going to do is we are going to just increase the value to 5 of our players, and I'm going to change the value of our enemies. So let's see where are our enemies. So here are our enemies, and I'm going to give it a value of, let's say, 4. I just want these enemies to be a little bit slower than our spaceship, because when there are going to be multiple enemies, then we don't want them to appear like really, really fast. So let's reload it now and see if it works. So it's still slow. Why is this happening? Our spaceship has increased its movement, but the enemy is still slow. So let's see if somewhere our old values are still persisting. So enemy, we have changed the X value over here. So let's go up and see where we have not changed the value. So over here, the enemy exchange is still 0.3. So we have to change it over here too. Let's make it 4. And now we can reload it, and you'll be able to see that the enemy is moving at a good speed. So now we have the background image, we have our spaceship, and we have our enemy. The only thing missing is the bullets, because we don't have the bullets right now to kill this enemy. So the next video we are going to make our bullets, or get started with making our bullets. So I'll see you over there. In this video, we are going to learn how to shoot our bullet inside our game window. So as you can see, I'm shooting a bullet at the enemy. So right now the bullet is not hurting the enemy because we haven't implemented the collision yet, but more on that in the future videos. In this video, we are just going to learn how to shoot a bullet. So let's get started. But before we get started with the code, I just wanted to explain a couple of things. And the first thing I wanted to explain is what's the starting position of the bullet. So when we are in the middle of the window, that is at 370 pixel X coordinate approximately, it's shooting from the top of our spaceship. But if we move left, it's still shooting at the X coordinate of our spaceship. It doesn't matter where our spaceship is, the X coordinate of the bullet is going to be always equal to that of our spaceship, just the starting positions. For example, if we shoot the bullet right now, even if we move our spaceship, the bullet is not moving with our spaceship. Just the starting position of the bullet is equal to that of our spaceship. So that is the first thing. And the second thing is that as we shoot the bullet's Y value is decreasing. So because at the bottom, the value is 600 Y coordinate, and as we go up, the value of Y decreases, and at the top it's actually 0. So at the top, the Y coordinate of Y of our bullet is going to be 0. So we have to decrease the value from about 480 pixels. So because this is 480 coordinate, Y coordinate, and we are going to decrease it as we go towards the top. So right now you can see that it's disappearing at the top. So the third thing I want to talk about before we go into code, because it's so important to understand, is the state of the bullet. So right now when you can't see the bullet, its state is at ready, but when you can see the bullet, its state is going to be at fire. So right now it's not appearing on the screen. That means that we are readying the bullet for fire. And when it shoots, you can see the bullet, and that means the bullet has been fired. So let's not do between that firing period anything. So this is what it means. Obviously, you are going to understand this more as we write down the code. So let's get started with that. So the first thing we need to do is add an image of a bullet inside our project folder. And I've already added it, as you can see on the left hand side, bullet.png, and it kind of looks like this. So how can you get this image? So you can just go to flaticon.com like we have done previously and search for this bullet, and you can just download this bullet from here. And obviously you can choose any bullet that you want, and even through Google or something, but make sure when you download this image, it's 32 by 32 pixels. Now this bullet is not the same as I'm using, but if you want, you can just go to the 6th or 7th page of this flaticon.com and you will find the same image, but feel free to use this image. It doesn't make a lot of difference. So now when you have downloaded this bullet.png, make sure it's 32 by 32 pixels. Let me just close this Photoshop. This is the background we made the last video. So after adding the bullet.png, we are going to add it into our PyCode. So over here, just below the enemy, we are just going to copy this enemy because we don't want to create everything again. And instead of enemy, we are just going to write bullet, and we are going to replace everything of our enemy with our bullet. So let's call it bullet, and then I'm just going to copy and paste everything. So bullet X, bullet Y, and let me just paste it, bullet exchange. And some of these values we are not going to use. So for example, bullet is not going to move in the X direction, so using this X underscore change is useless, but still we are going to just keep it over here just for this sake of conformity. But anyways, in this bullet X and bullet Y, we are going to give it the value of 0, bullet X, because we are going to be changing the value inside our while loop. But bullet Y is going to be at 480 pixels. Why is that? Because our spaceship, as you can see as player Y, is at 480 pixels. So at that level, the bullet is always going to be shot at. So if I run this main program over here, you can see that our spaceship is over here. And what's happening to our enemy? Let's reload it. Let's see if we have done something to an enemy. No. So as you can see, when we move our spaceship, it's not moving in the Y direction. So we need to shoot our bullet from its top of its nose, which is at 480 pixels of Y coordinate. That's why we have put in this 480 over here. And then we are going to add another variable, which is going to be bullet state. So this is the state I was talking about a few seconds ago. So we are going to add a variable bullet state, and we are going to give it a value of ready. So let me just add a comment actually over here so that you guys remember what this ready state is, what is fire state. So ready state basically means you can't see the bullet on the screen, and fire, the bullet is currently moving. All right, so this is the state we are going to be using to basically differentiate between whether the bullet is in motion or it's in a state of constant and it's not being fired right now. And it's going to help us decide the movement dynamics of our bullet. So now we have created another bullet state equals to ready, and now we are going to create a function known as fire bullet that is going to be called whenever we press our space bar. So in our game, whenever we press our space bar, a bullet is being fired. So that is what we want. And pressing the space bar, bullet gets fired. So, and what happens when we press space bar? We want this function of fire underscore bullet to be called. And we are going to do the same thing over here. We are going to call the X and Y variables. And just below that, we are going to access this bullet underscore state variable equals to ready inside our function. Now, how do you do that? We need to create this bullet underscore state function as global so that it can be accessed inside this function. So I'm just going to write global and then bullet state. And now we can access the value of this bullet state from inside this function. So after we press space, the bullet is actually being fired. So now you can see it on that screen. So we need to change the state of the bullet equals to fire. So now it's not ready, it's actually being fired, currently in motion. After that, we just need to make sure that it appears on the screen. So I'm going to write screen.bullet. We need to draw the bullet on the screen, and then I'm going to write the name of our bullet image, and then we are going to write the coordinates of where do we want it to appear. So we just want it to appear on X, Y, the values that we are getting from the function. Now we want these values to be at X plus 16 and Y plus 10. Why is that? So let me just format everything properly, and you can press Ctrl Alt plus L if you're using PyCharm to make sure that it looks good. So why are we doing this X plus 16, Y plus 10? This is to make sure that the bullet appears on the center of a spaceship. If you don't do plus 16, it's going to appear on the left hand side of the spaceship a little bit. I've already tried it out, so that's why I know 16 is the correct value. And this Y is just make sure that it appears a little bit above spaceship, just to give it an illusion of the bullet being fired from the top of the nose and not from the center of the spaceship. And now before we go into the while loop, I just want to change the value of change in Y, because our bullet is moving in the Y direction, and this is the value that we gave to the enemy. We don't want the bullet to move this fast. We want it to move at the speed of 10. So let's close this window now, and let's just go below. And what we want over here is that if an arrow key of space, not an arrow key, if a keystroke of space on our keyboard is pressed, then we want to call that fire underscore bullet function. So let's create that over here. So we can just copy and paste this line, and then at the end we can just add the value of space, so k underscore space, and this is going to make sure that we can capture the value of space. And what we want when we press the space, we want the fire bullet function to be called. And now what are the values inside this? So right now we are just going to give it a value of player X, but you'll understand why this is wrong. But this is just like a logic error, so I'm not gonna worry about it too much, but I'm gonna tell you why it's wrong, and we are gonna fix this in this video. So let's write it: if event.key pygame.k underscore space fire underscore bullet player X comma bullet Y. So let's run this right now and see how it looks. Obviously it's not complete, not even close to complete, but we're just gonna look how it looks. So right now you can see bullet is not there, but when we press the space, nothing is happening, and the enemy is appearing for some reason. Over here, if you see near the spaceship, the enemy is appearing because we haven't changed the name of our image. So let's go to our bullet, and over here instead of enemy, we are gonna call it bullet. I know when I was recording this and I was just writing this line, guys must have screamed that, hey, this should be bullet.png, not enemy.png, but no worries, we have changed that value. And now if we come back, you can see that you can't really see the bullet over here, but it's actually appearing, but it's appearing so fast that you can't see it. So actually, let me just change it to enemy again so that you guys can at least see it's happening behind the screen. So let me run this. And when we press space, you can see that the enemy is appearing near the spaceship. You can see this is happening. So this is how the bullet is also appearing, but right now you just can't see it. So let's change this back to bullet.png. Let's change it to bullet.png. So we need to do a couple of things. So why is it appearing and disappearing so quickly? What we need to do is we need to make sure that it persists in the background, and when we need anything to persist in Pygame, we add it to our infinite while loop. So right now this code is only being called when we press the space bar. We want this bullet to appear and then not disappear really quickly. So we are going to add another comment over here, and we're going to call this bullet movement. And over here we are going to just change the values and first check maybe the state of our bullet. So right now our state is when we press the space bar, then the state changes to fire, but at default the state always remains at ready. So as you can see that the bullet underscore state is equal to ready. And when we press the space bar, the fire underscore bullet function is called, and inside the function the state changes to fire. So outside over here we can write a condition: if bullet state is fire, then we can actually move the bullet in front of the spaceship and make sure it decreases in Y. So we're going to add some values, and we're going to call this fire bullet function again over here, and we're going to give it a value of player X, and we're going to give it a value of bullet Y. And just below this we are going to decrease the value of our bullet, just like we discussed at the starting of the video. Minus equal to bullet Y change, which is currently 10. So let's run this program now and see if it works. So this is our spaceship, and what's happening to our enemy? Why is it going crazy? Let me just reload this. What's up with this enemy? All right. So now you can see that the bullet is moving, but there are two problems in this. First, we can only fire one bullet. So you can see after we have fired one bullet, we can't fire another bullet. So that's one problem. And the second problem is that when we fire the bullet, when we move our spaceship, the bullet is moving with our spaceship. Just to give you guys another view, when we press space, the bullet is going, and when we move the spaceship, the bullet is actually moving with the spaceship. So we will be solving both of these problems in the next video. For right now, I'm just going to give you a recap so that you guys can understand properly what is going on. So let's go to the moment we press the space bar. So when we press the space bar, this event of space bar is triggered and this fire bullet function is called. And over here we send two values, that is the current position of player X and the bullet Y value. The bullet Y value is 480 Y coordinate, and the player X is the movement where the spaceship is, the X coordinate of the spaceship. And that is partly the reason why the bullet is moving in the direction of the spaceship, but we are going to tackle that in the next video. So for right now, we are calling this fire bullet function whenever the space key is pressed, and we are transferring the value of player X and bullet Y to our fire underscore bullet function. Now this fire bullet function is changing the state of our bullet state underscore to fire, so that when we execute this while loop, all this code can be executed. So we are finally firing the bullet, and to fire the bullet we first need to show it on the screen. So we are bulleting it out or drawing it on the screen, and we have changed the value of 16 and y. So just to show you guys why we have changed the values, let me actually remove the x and y values so that you guys can see the difference. So I'm just gonna run play and I'm gonna shoot a bullet. As you can see, the bullet is being shot a little bit from the left hand side, and we want it to be shot from the middle of the screen. That is why I did that. So in the middle of the spaceship, not from the middle of the screen to be exact. But anyways, after we did this fire underscore bullet function is being called, the bullet state has been returned to fire. And then we go to this infinite while loop which is running, but it wasn't running because before running the space bar or before pressing the space bar, the bullet state was ready. So all of this code was not getting executed, but after pressing the space bar, the bullet state has been changed to fire. So now we can bullet this out on the screen by calling this fire underscore bullet function, and we can start actually changing the location of the bullet by moving it in the upward direction by reducing the value of y. So guys, this was the logic of our bullets. In the next video, we are going to tackle the two problems that we have discussed in this video. So I'll see you over there. In the last video, we learned how to shoot a bullet, but there are a couple of problems with our program. Right now, we can shoot only one bullet at a time, and that's it. That's it for the whole game. So that's a pretty big problem. And the second problem is that the bullet is always following our spaceship. Doesn't matter where it goes, bullet will follow it. And we want it to have an individual path. So for example, we want the bullet to have the starting point of our spaceship, the x coordinate of our spaceship, but when we move the spaceship, the bullet should continue on its original x coordinate and not of our current spaceship. So these are the two problems we are going to solve. So let's solve the first problem first of having multiple bullets. So for that, what we are going to do is we are going to add an if condition. So right now, if you watch over here, when the bullet goes up, it goes to the 0 coordinate, and then we are not doing anything to the bullet. So it just keeps on going into negative values, and we are not removing the bullet from our screen. So what we need to do is, as soon as it crosses the 0 coordinate, we need to make sure that it resets to the value of 480. So as soon as it goes above 0 coordinate, two things are going to happen. First is going to reset to 480 pixels of y, and the second thing is, because you can't see it on the screen anymore because it has gone beyond 0 y coordinate, we are going to change the state of our bullet to ready again so that we can fire it the next time. So let me just add an if condition beneath this bullet movement, which says if bullet y is less than equals to 0, because above 0 is going to be negative values. And over here we are going to do two things. First is we are going to reset the state of the bullet, that is the bullet y should be resetted to 480 again. And the second thing is we need to change of the bullet state. So bullet state is going to be ready again. And let's make sure that we don't misspell anything, and we are going to format this properly, press enter, and now let's reload it, and you'll be able to see that our bullet is multiple. So right now you can see we have shot one bullet, then we can shoot another bullet, and it keeps on happening. And now that we have fixed the first problem, let's focus on the other problem, and that is that the bullet is following our spaceship. So why is this happening? This is happening because in our code we are still using the player x value. So if we go to our space condition, so after pressing space we are using the player x value, and even in our while if condition code of over here we are still using the player x value. So it's alright that we want the starting position of our bullet to be at the spaceship. Let me just remove this recording thing. So at the starting position we want the bullet to be at the x coordinate of our spaceship. So when you press space, the bullet starts from the spaceship and not from somewhere else. So for example, over here we want the x coordinate of our bullet to be that of the x coordinate of our spaceship. But when we move after firing the spaceship, the x coordinate shouldn't follow the spaceship. So that is the problem that we are having. So how do we solve that? So instead of using the bullet, the space player x value everywhere, we just use, when we press the space bar, one value of the x coordinate should be just saved. So we are going to do that. We are just going to write bullet x. We haven't used this variable yet, and we are going to save the value of player x over here. And then instead of player x, we are going to send the value of bullet x to our fire bullet function. And we are going to do the same thing over here in our if condition. So instead of player x, we are going to use the value of bullet x, and that should solve the problem. So let's run our main program again and see if it works. So this is our spaceship, and now if we move our spaceship, the bullet is not following our spaceship. So what we have done is, when the space bar is pressed, then we have saved the current spaceship X coordinate inside our bullet X variable, and then we are using that everywhere instead of just using player X. So now that we have fixed that, there is one more problem to fix which I've just realized. So the problem is that after pressing, if we press the space bar again, so for example we have pressed the space bar, the bullet is going, and then if we press the space bar multiple times, this bullet is going to change, just keep on moving according to our spaceship. So multiple space bar changes its X coordinate. And why is that happening? So while the bullet is in moving condition, it's in fire condition, even in that condition we can press our space bar. So we have to make sure that we can only press the space bar when it's in ready condition. So we are going to add a if condition over here which says if bullet state is ready. Let's add double quotes for the string. If the bullet state is ready, only then we can fire another bullet, otherwise we can't fire another bullet. So after our bullet goes above this 0 coordinate, or our bullet is in ready state, only then we can fire another bullet. So now if we press space, all the errors have been fixed except this first one. I don't know what happens to it sometimes. Alright, so let's shoot, and you can see that after it has crossed the 0 coordinate and it resets to 480 Y coordinate again, only then we can shoot another bullet. So this is looking pretty good, guys. We have finally completed the bullet module. This was a pretty long module because there were a lot of complications in it and a lot of things to understand. So let me just recap so that you guys can understand everything properly. So if anybody has understood everything perfectly, you guys can just stop this video. So what happens when we press the space bar? When we press the space bar, first it checks whether a bullet is already on the screen or not. If it's not on the screen, then it makes sure that it gets the X coordinate of our spaceship. Let me just add a comment so that you guys can understand. Get the current X coordinate of the spaceship. So it gets the current X coordinate of the spaceship and stores it inside this variable bullet X, and then it fires the bullet using this bullet X variable and this bullet Y variable, basically, which we have set before, that is 10. So we want the bullet to move at the speed of 10 or change its Y value at every while iteration at 10. So after we do that, it goes to this fire bullet function, and over there it changes the state to fire, and then it creates that bullet. After it changes its state to fire, it goes to this while loop iteration, and it says if bullet state is fire, and it keeps on firing the bullet. If we don't have this fire underscore bullet statement, then the bullet won't appear on the screen. So anything that we want to be persistent inside our game needs to be included inside our while loop. That is why we have this function inside our while loop. If this statement was not there, the bullet wouldn't be there. So that is why we need to make sure that the bullet is continuously appearing on the screen after every iteration of while loop. So after it fires the bullet and it keeps on changing its Y coordinate, because of this statement, it happens that it goes above the screen. So after it goes above the screen, this if condition is activated and it resets the bullet to 480 Y coordinate, and then it resets the bullet state to ready again, and then we can press the space bar again and everything happens again. Basically it saves again the X coordinate of a spaceship, but I'm not going to go into all of that. So guys, this is pretty much it for this video. In the next video, we are going to create multiple enemies. So right now there is only one enemy, so it's very easy for our spaceship, or maybe depending upon what I want, and maybe I'm gonna teach you guys how to shoot this enemy. So right now this enemy can pass through the bullet and nothing is happening to him. So we are gonna probably discuss that in the next video. So in the last video, we created multiple bullets. So instead of shooting just one bullet, we can shoot multiple bullets at the enemy, and we don't have to, just shoot one bullet during the whole game. But as you can see, our bullet is going through the enemy and it's not colliding, and nothing is happening when the bullet hits the enemy. Not the score is increasing, and the enemy is also at the same place. It's not respawning anywhere, which we want. So in this video, we are going to learn about the collision concept, how to make sure that the two objects have collided, and that's a very important concept in gaming. So what we'll be doing is that, let me just actually reload this game so that we can see the bullet and the enemy properly. So what I'm going to be doing is we are going to calculating the distance between the bullet and the enemy, and if the distance is short enough, then we are going to conclusively say that the bullet has collided. So the bullet has an X and Y coordinates when it goes up through the screen, and similarly this enemy also has an X and Y coordinate when it goes through the screen on left, right, or up and down. So we are going to use all of these four coordinates, that is the X coordinate and the X coordinate of our bullets and the Y coordinates of both our bullet and our enemy to calculate the distance between them. So now what I want you guys to do is go to Google and type in distance between two coordinates, and it's going to take you to this website mathplanet.com. And over here there is this equation which says distance equals to X coordinate minus X coordinates of other object squared plus Y coordinate of one object and Y coordinate of other object square, and then the square root of the whole thing. And this x2 and x1 doesn't matter whatever is at front, because by the end of the day we are squaring this. So obviously you must have learned this in school or in college, but if you haven't, don't worry about it. Just go through this article a little bit. You just need to execute this code, this equation in our Python. So even if you don't understand what this is doing, we are going to learn how to actually implement an equation in Python. So that is going to be really helpful for you guys. So keep this equation in mind, and let's go back to our code. And just beneath this fire underscore bullet function, we are going to create a new function, and we're going to call it is collision. So this function is basically going to help us with define whether a collision between the bullet and an enemy has occurred or not. So it's going to take four values: the X coordinate of the enemy, the Y coordinate of the enemy, the X coordinate of the bullet, and similarly the Y coordinate of our bullet. And now we are going to create a variable known as distance. So this distance will store the distance between the bullet and our enemy. And how do we calculate this distance? Obviously using this equation. So distance equals to, and then we are going to do a square root. So to do a square root or do any kind of mathematical operations, you need to import something known as math. So if you go up, I haven't imported math yet, so I'm just going to write import math. So I'm going to import that, and then first of all we want to do the square root. So let me go over here and just write math dot sqrt. So this is basically the function or the method for doing square root, and then apply some brackets. Now we need the enemy X and the bullet X, and we need to subtract it according to the formula. But before even that, we need to square it. So if we go back to our equation, you can see after the square root, the x2 minus x1 is being squared. So we also need to implement that mathematical formula. So we are just going to write math dot pow. So this stands for power, and then it requires two values, the X and the Y. So we're going to do that. So we are going to just write comma 2 because we want it to be squared, and then over here we are going to give it the value of enemy X minus enemy Y. Alright, so this is looking good. We have executed the first part of our equation. Now we have to execute the second part of the equation, that is plus y2 minus y1 and the squared. So we are going to go back over here and inside our math.par, so this is this part, math.par x2, and this is enemy, not enemy Y, this is bullet X, sorry about that. And then we are just going to write plus, and then we are going to write math.power again because we need another power, and it requires two values. First is the path value, so we want it to be squared again, and then we just need to subtract the enemy Y, so enemy Y minus bullet Y, and this should give us the value. Obviously we need to close this math dot square root, so we are going to apply another bracket, but looks like it's an extra bracket. So what we are doing is math dot pow, we are doing x2 minus x1 or x1 minus x2, doesn't matter, squared it, and then math dot pow y2 minus y1 squared. So just to make sure that these two are separate, we are going to apply another bracket over here. So I'm going to also do this with this one. Let's not blunder. All right, so there is some problem over here. So this is the problem. So let's apply a bracket over here instead of that. And this is looking pretty good. So now what we are going to do is we are going to write an if condition. If this distance is less than 27 pixels, then return us the value of true, that is the collision has occurred, else return us the value of false. So we're gonna write if condition and return false. I mean, we didn't need to write this if condition, we could have just returned false over here, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys understood. All right, let's format it properly. Obviously, if you need to format anything in PyCharm, make sure you press Control Alt plus L. L is for, I don't know, loser, something. So make sure you press Control Alt plus L if you're using PyCharm. It should format everything beautifully. All right, so our isCollision function is complete. So now what we are gonna do is, we are gonna scroll down and we are gonna write inside our while infinite loop over here, just below this enemy X or even the bullet X, we are gonna add a comment that's gonna stand for collision so that we know that we are writing the code for collision. And over here, we can just check whether a collision is happening or not. So I'm just gonna create a variable called collision and then I'm gonna call this isCollision function. And over here, we are gonna set the value of enemy X, enemy Y. And over here in all of this code inside this while loop, we are manipulating the value of X and Y of enemy and the bullet. So this is the right place to call this isCollision function. So over here, we are just gonna write bullet X, comma bullet Y. All right, so this is looking good. So this isCollision is going to store the value of true and false. And if the collision has occurred, it's gonna store the value of collision of true in collision. All right, so this is looking good. And then we're going to write a condition if collision. So what do you want us to do if the collision is occurring? Basically, that is what our program is asking. So what do we want after a collision has occurred? So the first thing that we want is to reset the bullet to its starting point. So we are going to reset the bullet Y at 480. And then because the bullet is not being shown anymore, we want to change the state of the bullet to ready. So let's change the state of the bullet to ready by writing bullet state equals to ready. And then the last thing we want to do is obviously increase the score. So I'm just going to create a new variable. Let's actually just go over here so that it's close by, and we are going to write the value of score equals to 0. All right, so this is looking pretty good. So I'm going to just scroll down, and over here I'm going to write score, why am I missing the variable of score? Square plus equals to 1. So this will increase the value by 1 every time we hit our enemy. And after that, we are just going to print out our score. So I'm just going to print it out on the screen. So now let's just run our program and see if everything is working or not. So I'm just going to run the main program. And over here, we are going to shoot our bullets. And hopefully if it hits and I'm not a bad player, as you can see, the score increased by 1. So let's try to hit it again. And as you can see, the score is increasing by 1. But when we are not hitting it, the score is not increasing. So let's try to make our score at least 5. All right, so the score is 5. So one thing you must have noticed is that the enemy is still on its current path and it's not respawning to its default location. So we need to fix that. So what we are going to do is we are going to change the value of player X, the enemy X and the enemy Y over here. So I'm just going to scroll up and check out where we have declared the value of enemy X and enemy Y. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to paste this inside our if collision. Obviously, like this code can be optimized. We can create a new function for all of this stuff that is happening over here. But maybe we can do that in the later videos, all the optimization classes and functions. We'll see whether we do that or not, because this is not such a complicated program. But maybe we will. So now what will happen is that the enemy X and the enemy Y will get restarted or respawn to a default location and will respawn to a random integer that is between 0 to 800. And Y is 50 to 150. Obviously, we have already discussed what this does. It basically gives a default position to the enemy. So let's give it a shot again, and we're going to run the main again and see if it works. So let me just wait for it. All right, so our enemy is actually just going back to its new location. All right, let's just wait for the enemy to come back a little bit down so that we know that our code is working properly. So let's shoot it. All right, so our game is respawning properly. Our enemy is respawning properly and it looks good. So one thing you might have noticed that when it comes to this right hand side of the screen, it just drops down. Even if you're trying it on your own, if an enemy respawns towards the right hand side of that window, of our window, it just goes down. So why is that happening? That is happening because when we respawn our enemy, or when we are creating the enemy, we are giving it a value of 0 to 800. But inside our code, we have written in over here that if the enemy X is greater than 736, make sure you change its Y value. So therefore, whenever our enemy is respawning with a greater value than 736, it's immediately going down without a chance to go left. That's why we need to make sure that over here, when we are creating the enemy, that we don't increase the value till 800, only till 736. And just for safety, we are going to write 735. So obviously we need to make sure that this 735 also goes in when a collision has occurred. So I'm just going to copy that over here too. All right, so this looks good. We have also fixed an error. So this is looking pretty good. All right. So, all right, the enemy is respawning properly. Let me just shoot it again. All right. So, all right, guys, so this is pretty much it for this video. In the next video, we are going to learn how to create multiple enemies. So right now there is only one enemy, so the game is pretty easy. You can just play it really easy, and actually it's pretty fun to play. While I'm recording this video, I'm also playing. But anyway, guys, let me just recap actually quickly so that you guys can understand. So if you already understand the video, just go to the next video. But for people who have not understood it properly, so we have created a function called isCollision, where we have 4 coordinates, 2 of enemy coordinates and 2 of bullet coordinates. And we have used all of these 4 coordinates in this formula, which we got from typing in distance between 2 coordinates, this formula, and then we try to execute this formula inside our code. Obviously, before you start doing this math.squared, make sure that you import math. And after that, we made the square root, and then inside this, we using the .pow function, we squared it, just like we have done in this formula, x2 minus xy squared. So we needed to make sure that we squared it, and make sure that the brackets are correctly placed, because if you guys are typing the code, you might mess up somewhere. So make sure you guys are typing this code properly line by line. All right, obviously I'll upload all of this code on GitHub, so you'll find it somewhere over there. And by the end of this series, I'll upload it after recording all the videos. So you can wait for it a little bit, or you can find it in the description or attachments or something. So mat.pow enemy x minus bullet x, you guys understand all of this stuff. And then how this 27 number came to be. So I just tried and tested what was the proper number for distance between enemy and bullet to call it a collision. And I just by trial and testing, I came on this number. If the distance between the bullet and the enemy is less than 27, I'm going to call it a collision. And then if the collision has occurred, it will return true. And obviously we are calling this function over here if collision. So if a collision has occurred, what do we want from a program? First of all, we want to reset the y of the bullet to 480. That is the starting position of the spaceship. And then we are going to change the state equals to ready, because you can't see the bullet anymore. And when you can't see the bullet anymore, the state is ready. And then we increase the score by 1 and we printed out the score. And then we made sure that the enemy respawned to its new location. All right, guys. So this is basically a way to track back a little bit. This is just a way to kill the enemy and then make sure that we also create a new enemy. Alright guys, this is pretty much it for this video. Thank you for hanging out. In the next video, we are going to learn how to create multiple enemies. So I'll see you over there. In this video, we are going to learn how to create multiple enemies. And in the previous video, we learned about how the collision system works. So for example, if we shoot the enemy, it's going to respawn to a new place as well as increase our score. So how do we make sure that multiple enemies appear on a screen? So for example, 6 enemies. So what we can do, one idea is that we can store all of these 6 enemies in a list or an array, but in Python it's called a list. So we are going to store all of the enemies in a list and display them one by one on the screen, but it's going to happen so fast that it will look that all the 6 enemies are appearing simultaneously on the screen. So we are going to turn all of these variables into a list variable. And how do you do that? You simply copy the variable name and equal to and brackets. So this signifies an empty list. There is nothing inside this list, and we are going to use a for loop to put values inside this list. But we have to do it with all of the variables. So let's do that. So let's do it with enemy X and then enemy Y. So I'm just going to copy this, paste over here. Let me just copy everything first, and then I'm going to add the square brackets, not the neatest way, but the quickest way. And then I'm just going to copy all of these square brackets quickly. All right. And how do you add values inside a list? So right now this is an empty list. And how do you add values to a list is by using a method known as .append. So instead of equals to, we are going to use .append over here. But even before that, we are going to create a variable known as num of enemies, which stands for number of enemies. And we can change this variable whenever we want to increase the number of enemies. So we are going to create a for loop for I in range, and inside this we are going to put num of enemies. So this loop for right now is going to run 6 times, and 6 of our enemies are going to be created. Obviously, we want all of these values to be added to the list that we have created of all the variables. So what we are going to do, instead of equal to, we are going to write dot append, and this is going to add our current value inside our list. So for example, the first enemy image is going to be stored inside this enemy image list. So we are going to do all of this with all of the variables, and you don't need to do it with enemy y change because these are like constant values, but we are going to, just for the sake of simplicity, we are going to do it with all of them. Alright, so let me just do it with all of them. I'm going to copy this dot append everywhere. So just to do it quickly, again, not the neatest way, but the quickest way. And that is what we want, just the quickest way. And let me just add the brackets after everyone so that there are no errors and it looks neat. Alright guys, so this is looking pretty well. So whenever our code is going to run, it's going to go through this and it's going to create 6 number of enemies. But if you scroll down inside our while loop, you can see that we don't specify which enemy X do we want to move. So this is the code that we are using for the enemy to move towards the left hand side or the right hand side and the downward movement. But if we don't specify which enemy X we are talking about, because if you notice above, we have declared 6 enemy X, and because we have created a variable called as enemy X, we have created an empty list. So each time this for loop is going to run, is going to enter a new value of enemy X inside this enemy X list. So we need to make sure that our program understands which enemy X we are talking about. So we are going to create another for loop over here, and we're going to do the same thing that we did over there, number of enemies. And the idea is pretty intuitive. You just need to change every value over here to basically inside a square bracket, just specify which value you are talking about. And this is a way to reference something inside a list. Obviously, if you know list, you probably already know about this. So anyways, we are going to do this. We are going to add this I bracket everywhere. So let me just copy and paste this everywhere so that our program knows which enemy Y we are talking about, which enemy Y change we are talking about. So let me just copy this everywhere. All right, this is looking pretty good. And then we also need to make sure that a collision is also inside our enemy. So we are going to copy all of this code from over here, and we are going to place this inside our while loop, because we need to make sure that we calculate the collision for every, let me just paste this. So you can see that over here that currently our collision is not inside our for loop, but actually inside, yeah, it's actually inside our for loop. But make sure that it's not inside this elif condition or the if condition. Otherwise, it's not going to work. A lot of people make this mistake that they don't paste the collision part correctly or don't paste anything properly. So anyways, after making sure that you have pasted this properly inside our for loop, we are also going to change these. Let me just press Ctrl Z. We are going to make sure that our Python program knows which enemy X coordinates we are talking about. So let me just paste this over here. All right, so this is looking pretty good. We also need to make sure that we add I over here. So basically, wherever we are talking about the enemy or the collision, you need to make sure that our program knows which coordinate or which enemy we are talking about. And then the last thing we need to do is wherever we are calling the enemies, for example, over here, calling the enemy function, and this is where we're basically blitting the enemy, we also need to make sure that we add which image do we want to be blitted. So right now it's not specifying. So we are going to paste this inside our enemy for loop and make sure it's not pasted inside the if condition, it's pasted inside our loop. So indentations matter. And then we are going to send the value of I according with specifying which X and Y coordinates do we want to be blitted on the screen. So basically which enemy we are talking about. So if we go up to our enemy function over here, you can see we haven't specified the I value. So we need to specify the I value and also the which image, enemy image do we want to draw. Obviously you will be thinking there is only one image, but actually there are 6 enemy images because we have created a list of enemy images too, as you can see over here. Alright guys, so this is looking pretty good. I think almost all of the code is done. So let me just play it and then we'll figure out what we have to recap, and if there are any errors we can solve them. So let's play it and see if it works. Alright, so this is looking pretty good. We have created our 6 enemies, and when we shoot them, So let's try and shoot one of them. I'm such a bad player. Alright, so when we are shooting them, our collision is also working. They are respawning. Alright, so this is looking pretty good. So how is this game gonna end? Whenever one of these space invaders come and hit the bottom of the spaceship, or basically hit the 480 y-axis, then we are gonna end the game. So we'll just keep shooting and increase the score. And right now there is no place where we are displaying the score. So in the next video, we are gonna make sure that we display the score on the left hand side top corner. Alright guys, welcome back. So in the last video, we created multiple enemies and our game is looking real good. So the score system is working, but the score is not being currently displayed on our game window. So we'll fix that in this video. We'll make sure that the score appears on the top left corner of our screen. So how do you do that? So that is simple. We use the font object that is inside pygame. So pygame is actually going to help us create font or text on the screen. So the first thing we need to do is go to this bullet image, and we are going to actually remove the score variable that we've created over here. So instead of that, we are going to just press enter and write score so that we know we are creating score under this statement. And then right now we are going to create a variable known as score value, and we're going to give it a value of 0. And obviously you can see with this red symbol there is some error which says score plus 1. We are doing it over here, so we need to change this to score value, and then we can remove the print statement because we don't need it now. So let's just go up now, and then we have to use the score object or the pygame font object. So that is pretty easy. You just create a variable known as font, and obviously you probably know already what font is. Font is just the type of text or the style of text that is displayed. How much the width of the line of an eye is actually dependent upon the font, what kind of font you use. So first we are going to define what kind of font do we want. So how do you do that? You just use the pygame.font method that is inside pygame.font capital F font, and inside this we are going to give it two values. The first is which font do we want. So inside pygame there is one free font which is known as free sans bold. So right now we are just going to use this font, and .ttf is the extension of the font, and then we are going to give it a size. So we are just going to give it a size of 32. And then after that, we are going to give it the X and Y coordinates of where we want this text to appear. So we want it to appear in the top left corner somewhere, but not just attached to the screen, a little bit away from the screen. So we are going to give it a value of text X, this is the X coordinate of 10 pixels, and then text Y of, that is the Y coordinate also of 10. Now, just like we did with these player enemies, we have to create a function that is going to show this score value on the screen. So let's do that. We are going to create a function which we are going to call show score. Pretty easy stuff. And inside this function, we have to give it the X and Y values just like we have done with everything else. And one difference is that, for example, you can see here we are blitting the image inside this def player. Now, instead of blitting the player or drawing the player on the screen, we are going to render the text on the screen. So I'll just show you what I mean by that. So we're going to create a variable of score, and inside this we are going to write font.render, and it's going to require some values inside it. So this is what I mean by instead of blitting, we are going to render the text or show the text on the screen. So using this font object we have created over here, we are going to write font.render, and then it's going to require a couple of values. The first value is what text do you want. So we want our text to be, first of all, score, and then we want the score value in front of the text. So we are going to write int. Actually, we have to convert it into a string. So right now, this score value is an integer, so we have to use typecasting. And inside this, so basically we are converting this integer value to a string by writing str in front of it. This concept in Python is known as typecasting, and actually in programming, this concept is known as typecasting. So inside this we are going to write score value, and then after that the second value is required is true, so we can display it on the screen. And then the third value it requires is what is the color of font that you want. You can show whatever color you want. Obviously we have to use the RGB values which we have discussed before, but I'm just going to use the white color, that is 255 red, 255 green, and then 255 blue. So this is looking pretty good. Let me just format this properly. and then we are going to show it on the screen. And how do you show it on the screen? So first we are going to render the score or render the text, and then we have to split this text on the screen or draw this text on the screen. That is why I said this is a little bit different. First you have to render, then you have to split it on the screen. So we are going to use the same concept we have over here. So actually let me just copy this from here and paste it. And instead of image, we are going to render our score. So this time it's not an image, it's a font or a text. And it requires X and Y value, which we are providing through this function. And now one last step that we have to do is pretty easy. We just have to go down, and anything that we want to persist on our screen obviously has to be called inside our while loop. So I'm just going to call our show score function, and XY is text X and text Y. Alright guys, so this is looking pretty easy. So let me just run it and show you that it works. And hopefully it will run without any errors. So our score is displayed on the top left corner, and when we shoot someone, let me just shoot someone, as you can see our score is increasing. So let me just shoot a couple of more enemies or space invaders. Alright guys, so this is looking pretty good. Our score is increasing, enemies are being respawned, and our game is being created. So one last thing I want to tell you guys is that how do you add extra fonts? So right now, if we go to our fonts, so for example, here is a font. This is the only font that is inside our pygame. So let me just close this. How do you add other fonts inside this? So what you can do is you can go to a website or something and download fonts, and they will give you a font that is of extension .ttf, and you can just download this, place it inside your project structure, and just write the name of the font. So for example, what you can do is you can go to this website known as DA font, and this gives a lot of fonts for free. So you can download just any font that you want, and it's going to give you a zip file. Just extract that zip file, and it's going to give you a .ttf file. Then paste that TTF file inside this Space Invader project folder, and just write the name over here, and then you can use that font inside your pygame. So this is pretty easy. And this stands for the font size. So let me just increase the font size to something crazy, 70 maybe. It's not that crazy, but as you can see, the score has increased to 70 size. But let's keep it small, 32 pixels. Alright guys, so this is pretty much it. So just to recap for a little bit, first we created the score value, we added a font object, then we created the X and Y coordinates of the font where we want it to appear. And then inside a show score, we did two things. We rendered the font, and then we blitted it or drew it on the screen. In render, we applied or gave it three values: the score, the true, and the color of our text. So you can change it to green. So let me just show it to you guys. Our GB, so GB should be 255, and then we can make both of these values as 0, red, and blue. And this should make it green. Let's play it, and as you can see, it's green. But we want it in white color. White, I think, looks good on any game. So let me just change it to 255 again. All right, let me just give a space over here. And then we drew it on the screen. And then the last thing we did was, before changing the value of our score, so after collision, we need to make sure that the score value is increasing by 1 after we hit the enemy by a bullet. And the second thing is we call the show underscore function. That is pretty standard. Alright guys, so in the next video we are going to learn how to end the game. So right now the game is not ending, it's just keeping on going even if the enemy hits our spaceship. So one thing I noticed is that the enemies are not moving very fast. So we'll also increase the speed of the enemy a little bit in the next video, and we'll make these minor changes. So I'll see you over there. Alright guys, welcome back, and hopefully you're having a great day. And today we are going to learn about how to add sounds and music to our pygame. And currently there are no sounds inside our game, so it looks pretty simple. But what we are going to do is we are going to add three types of sounds. The first sound is the background sound that's going to play continuously in the background. The second is the shooting of the bullet sound. In this case, I've called it laser.wave. And the third one is explosion.wave that's going to be produced when our laser bullet hits our enemy. And just to show you guys how it sounds, I'm going to play this main.python file, which I've already changed the code of, so that you guys can see what's happening inside our game. So I'm just going to play it and you can see. Alright, so you must have seen there are three sounds. First sound continuously goes in the background, second is the laser or the bullet sound, and the third is when our bullet hits our enemy. Now how can you get all these three files? Let me actually make sure that the code is original and the last one that we have used. And now how do you get these three .wave files? So what I want you guys to do is I want you to go to github.com, Athrayabhat, space invaders pygame, and you'll be able to get all the code that I've written till now, and along with it you'll be able to get the .wave files that I have been talking about. After downloading these three files, or maybe the whole code, and you can download them by clicking on this clone or download and then download zip, make sure you add these sound files to your project by going to Space Invader and just pasting them over there. Now let's get started with adding background music into our game. So first thing we need to do is import something known as a mixer from our pygame library, and to do that we just write from pygame import mixer. Import this mixer. And what is this mixer? This is basically a class that helps us handle all kind of music inside our game, whether it can be repeating a music, loading a music, anything that you want. So you have to look inside this class whenever you want to do anything with sounds or music. And then just below this background, we are going to add a background sound. So let's write our comments so that you guys can know in future what we are talking about. And then we are just going to use the mixer library by writing mixer.music.load. Pretty easy because we want to load the file and then we are going to play the file. And inside this, we are just going to write background.wave, which is the name of our file, as you can see on the left hand side. And then we are just going to play this sound by writing mixer.music.play. Pretty easy. And now we want this file to play continuously, because right now if we don't add anything inside this .play, this file is going to play once and then just stop. But we want it to play in a loop because this is a game and can go on for long. We don't want it to play just once. And how do you do that inside this mixer class? You just add -1 and it's going to play on loop. So now let's just test it out and see whether it's working or not. As you can hear, the background music must be going on, but we haven't yet added the bullet sound or the explosion sound, so that must not be there. So that's why we are going to be working on adding the bullet sound now. But one thing I want you guys to notice is that currently we are using mixer.music because we want this file to be played continuously in the background. So this is kind of a music. But if something is very short, for example, our bullet sound, then we have to use mixer.sound. So we are just going to come below where we have a bullet shooting. So how are we going to catch the moment where our bullet is being released? So we are going to do that inside our, let's go to above, let's go to this if bullet state is ready. So over here we can release the sound of our bullet going out from our spaceship. So because over here we are getting the X coordinate of the spaceship and then we are shooting the bullet over here, so we can somewhere over here add our bullet sound. And how do you do that is also pretty easy. Just below this we are going to write mixer.sound. So in this case it's not mixer.music, it's mixer.sound. And we're gonna first create a variable. Let's create a variable and call it bullet_sound, just to make sure that we know where our sound is. And mixer.sound, and inside this you have to give the file of the sound. So in our case is laser.wave. And then just like we did in the music case, we are gonna play it. So we are just gonna write bullet sound.state bullet sound.play. And we don't want it to be played inside a loop. That's why we haven't added -1. So now our bullet is making a sound. Now we just need to add a sound to our collision. And where are we catching collision? Let me just copy this first and we are going to go below. I just want you to guess first where we are going, because this is pretty obvious. We are going to this part where if collision, we want a sound be played, and that sound is of explosion. So we are just going to copy and paste this over here because most of the things are going to be same. Instead of bullet, we are going to write explosion sound, and then I'm just going to copy and paste this just below this .play, and instead of laser.wave we are going to go with explosion.wave. So guys, this is pretty much it. Let's actually play our game one more time and see if everything is working properly. So let's play this. Alright guys, so everything is looking really good. So all of the three sounds are playing. Obviously feel free to work around and play around and add more sounds, maybe remove and add your own sounds. That's going to be fun. In the next video we are going to learn about how to make sure that our game gets over when our enemy hits our spaceship. So I'll see you over there. In the last video, we learned how to add sounds to our game, and in this video, we are going to show the game over screen. So I've removed all of these sounds for this video because it's going to be difficult to explain what's going on if I add the sound. So what we are going to do is when many of these enemies come close to our spaceship, maybe till over here, we are going to remove all of these enemies or maybe just get them out of the screen, and we are going to show a big test just like we have shown over here the score 0. We are going to show a big text of game over here in the middle of the screen. And when is this pixels gonna hit? When are these enemies gonna come close to the spaceship? When they are gonna hit the y-axis of 440 pixel. So if you remember, at the top it's 0 pixel, at the bottom is 600 pixel, and just at the starting of the spaceship it's about 480 pixel. But just by experimenting, I have found out that 440 is perfect. So we're gonna use that 440 pixel as a limit. So when our enemies come till over here, we are gonna show game over for our player, and the final score is gonna be shown over here. So what we are going to do is we are going to come to our enemies where we are moving our enemies basically. So we are going to come down and come to enemy movement. So enemy movement was over here. And then over here we are just going to add a text. So let's add the text and just call it game over, because we are going to be writing the game over code just below this. And what we want is whenever an enemy, let's enemy y, and whenever enemy y of I, so whenever one of the enemies, it doesn't need to be all of the enemies, when one of the enemies come to 440 pixels, and actually just to test it out, I don't want the enemies to come to the bottom, so I'm going to make it very small, maybe to 200 pixels. And just when we are ending the game, when we are finalizing the game, I'm going to change it again to 440 pixels. So whenever one of the enemies come to 200 pixels, then what we want to do, we want to move all the enemies. So we are going to create another for loop for j in, and then we're just gonna copy all of these. So because we want to move all the enemies out of the screen, that's why I'm going to create another for loop inside this big for loop. And then under this, I'm just gonna change the axis of enemy y, j equals to 2000, and this should make sure that these enemies go below the screen to 2000 y pixel. And then after this, I'm gonna just make sure that we display the game over text. So how do you do that? I'm just gonna create a function, and this function will be called underscore game over text, and we are gonna call this function, and then we are gonna break out of this loop. So let me make sure that we are not doing anything weird with the brackets, and over here we are just gonna write break, and this looks pretty good. So what we are doing is whenever our enemy, it doesn't need to be all the enemies, when one of the enemies reaches this greater than 200 pixels in this case, but it's actually going to be 440, and then we are going to collect all of the enemies inside this for loop, and we want each of the enemies to be moved out of the screen, and we are doing that by setting the y-axis to 2000, which is not going to be shown on the screen. And then we are calling this game over text function, which is going to display the game over text on the screen, and then we are breaking out of this loop because we don't need this for I in range loop anymore. So now let's create this game over underscore test function. So we are going to go where we have added our score. So let's just go over here. So you can see we have added our score over here. So we are going to do doing basically the same thing, and we are going to write game over text over here, and then we're going to copy the same thing that we have done over here, and instead of font we are going to just write game, or maybe you can write over underscore font. And we want the font to be bigger, so this is the size of the font. We are going to make it 64 by 64 pixel. The size is bigger. And then we are going to create our function. So just below this show underscore function, we are going to create our game over text function, and we are going to do the same thing that we did previously with our show underscore function. And then over here, let's just copy and paste this line. So we are going to copy this, paste over here. And then instead of score, let's just call it over underscore text. And then we don't need all of this stuff. We just need to be displayed game. And let's make it in capitals just to make sure it looks good. Game over. So this is looking good. Then we just need to blit it on drawn on the screen. So we're going to copy and paste this over here. Let's just press enter and paste this over here. And then instead of score, we are going to write over underscore text. And we are not, because we are not going to use the x and y values. We can use it, but because our game over text is going to be displayed at one place, so I'm going to remove this, and instead of that, I'm just going to write 200 250 pixels, and this 200 250 pixel is basically the middle of the screen. You can try out different values and see what works for you, but basically I've divided both of these values by 2 and made it a little bit less, both the x and y axis, and that's how I got to the center. Obviously you need to change the values a little bit so that it looks good. Anyways, so this is looking pretty good right now. Let's run our main.py file and see if it's working. And you have to remember that we have made it 200 pixels, and you can see that our game over text is being displayed, but it's not in the middle and it's not big. So why is that happening? And this is because we have used the same font over here that we have created previously, this font. We need to change this, and because we have created a new font that is known as the O font, so we're just gonna copy this and paste this. Instead of font.render, we are gonna paste over underscore font because this is our new font, and this font was used for score, that's why it's so small. Now let's reload it, and hopefully this time it will work. So let's wait for it to come to 200 y-axis, and after that it's going to show the game over screen. So now you can't hit any of the enemies, so the score is going to remain the constant. So let me just show it to you again. Let me just hit a couple of enemies, and now we have hit our enemies. So let's wait for our 200 pixel to get over, and it's going to happen anytime soon. All right, so it's showing game over, and now because you can't hit any more enemies, your score is going to remain constant. Obviously, you can add more buttons like play again and do stuff like that, but by now you already know how to do it, so I'm not going to go into it again. So now finally, let's change, now that we know that our code is working, instead of 200, let's change it to 440 pixels. And make sure you add the sounds again and make it a complete game. So guys, this is pretty much it for this video series. We created our Space Invader games from scratch, and if you were a beginner who didn't know anything about pygame or creating games, now you have a basic understanding of how a game is created. It has been wonderful hanging out with you guys, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.